how do you fight against this administrative state that is funded by, this endless money printer? How do you, is it in terms of election? Is it in terms of getting people to, adopt Bitcoin in the United States? Corey Clipston wrote a paper called The Race to Avoid the War, where he makes the case about, getting an intransigent minority in the United States. I think it's like 10 million Bitcoiners that are unwilling to bend in a certain issue. How do you, is it an educational thing? Is it a lobbying thing? What's your take on that, Parker?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's somewhere between too big to fail on Bitcoin side of like too many people have to adopt it, and where the interests become conflicted. I think I saw a tweet from Safety and Moose, or someone putting a tweet out that quoted him, that was, "Come for the greed, stay for the revolution." And I honestly, so I think it's like, it really is education, but it's education on the side of like people, kind of will generally adopt Bitcoin for fear of missing out. That fear of missing out is actually rational. Like they're following a market signal that's saying Bitcoin's not dying; it continues to increase in purchasing power over time. I either need to adapt or die. I either need to adopt this or not. And oftentimes, people first adopt Bitcoin for the reason that they're expecting their wealth to increase. As people fall further and further down the rabbit hole, there's this saying, which I think is 100% true. It's not true to 100% rule in all cases, but is that Bitcoin changes people more than people change Bitcoin. I think that's something we're seeing currently as people are trying to change Bitcoin, or at least certain of the consensus rules. But it's getting more people in and engaged of why they have an individual interest or a business interest to gain by adopting Bitcoin. And then once they're in the Bitcoin vortex, they become, on Team Bitcoin. And the more people that adopt it, the harder it is to stop. The more people in the government body that are holding Bitcoin individually, their interest is aligned to not fuck it up. The more people within JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, the Federal Reserve that own Bitcoin, the less likely they are to fuck it up, because ultimately they're going to align behind their own self-interest. And those self-interests are both personally and their businesses.
Yeah, and it's so it's in it. So my interpretation is it's a bottom up, right? It's an infiltration, so to speak, not in a bad way, because I feel like that has like a negative connotation attached to it, but it's adoption, right? The more people adopt Bitcoin in positions of power and influence, the more they're incentivized to act against it, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and I do think it's bottom up. Like when you use the term infiltration, it's like if people are educated on how Bitcoin can help them, at the individual level, at the family level, at the community level, at the business level, they will act in their own self-interest. And by acting in their own self-interest, everyone benefits too, gotcha, because we're getting sound money. But it is that, maybe not every person adopting Bitcoin is created equal. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. If the CEO of General Electric or GM figured out why Bitcoin was money and why sound money was the key to their companies surviving and all their employees continuing to have jobs and their ability to build better cars, well, that one CEO is figuring out Bitcoin may matter more than somebody down the line at GM or down the line at GE. And while Bitcoin solves a problem for everyone, kind of a rifle shot approach to get people that can otherwise stymie or put up roadblocks or make our lives more difficult, would be better, kind of accelerating their path to understanding Bitcoin. Like if you could get Jay Powell to figure out why his entire life has been a disaster, and that Bitcoin is the answer, like causing that domino to fall has far faster ripple effects than maybe somebody else learning about Bitcoin.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, Nayib Bukele in El Salvador, or Michael Saylor, bold in their own fronts, right? Nayib Bukele on the nation state level, Michael Saylor on the public company front. But yeah, I agree, right? Because they're proving that Bitcoin is a viable alternative to holding fiat or using fiat currencies. So I completely agree. Now, Parker, I come from I'm extremely bullish for the next 5-10 years, just because I think that the next cycle, I think those two gentlemen, those two guys, are really going to prove. They're going to prove a lot of the mainstream consent. I hate calling it mainstream. Really, the corporate media, better said, the corporate media narrative that Bitcoin is a bad thing. This is going to destabilize El Salvador. That's one of the things that I heard. Not so many attacks on Michael Saylor, but mostly on El Salvador. I think that by the next cycle, whenever it comes, it's going to be undeniable that these two gentlemen made the right decision. And then tie this in with the FASB news that dropped today and the BlackRock Bitcoin ETF. So to speak, figuratively, it really does seem like all the stars and all the planets are aligning for Bitcoin. Like I'm extremely optimistic and very, very bullish about the next couple of years. I think we might see something that we aren't expecting. Maybe I'm maybe I'm too optimistic, but that's my take. I would love to get your take.
I think that I do think that both of those individuals, Bukele and who I do not know, never talked to, only observing from afar, as well as Saylor, again, who I do not know well, but had a few conversations, that time will prove them to have been both bold and be rewarded for it. I think that that each one, I think, sets a precedent, and that they're not the only precedents that are important, but they are important precedents at the same time. And so I don't know if it's necessarily that the stars are aligning, but that the longer the Bitcoin kind of continues to move forward with each passing cycle, something else is true, which is that the fiat system is kind of nearer and nearer to its death throes. And that at the same time that the trains coming off the rails or wheels coming off the bus, whatever analogy you want to use, that Bitcoin development and adoption and knowledge distribution only continues to grow, that things will continue to accelerate, and things will become more and more obvious to more and more people, with kind of reaching a level where public companies are buying and holding Bitcoin, and nation states are starting to adopt it, that Bitcoin can't be nothing and vaporware at the same time that these other things are true that are deeply fundamental. So I do think, but I think it will always be true that kind of Bitcoin always seems primed to take a more significant step forward, but that will always be the case as it gets larger and larger. And also, I think it's the government media, not the corporate media.
Interesting. What makes you say it's the government? I mean, supposedly these are private companies.
Yeah, but I'm saying they're co-opted by the government. As we saw post lockdown, and how they've pushed pharmaceuticals, and how everybody basically becomes like champion. Everyone who's a fan of the media is now suddenly a fan of like Pfizer. Like Pfizer's like the best thing since sliced bread. That basically the large corporation interests are co-opted by the government.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, and you see that like on the war footing too. I remember seeing a tweet from, I think it was like Jack Posobiec, and he said something like along the lines of, if social media existed in 2003, there would be a big probability that we wouldn't have gone to war with Iraq. And the reason I'm saying that is because it was originally the New York Times that dropped the art. It's the same New York Times, by the way, that is attacking Bitcoin. But it was originally the New York Times that dropped the infamous article that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, and that started a domino effect. So I like that. It's not so much corporate media; it is government media. So you said something earlier that I kind of wanted to double back on, because you said it with such confidence, and it was. You said, look, but it was in a way, it was nonchalant, but it was very confident. I really want to focus on that, which is, you said Bitcoin, I'm paraphrasing or I'm misquoting, but you said basically like Bitcoin will replace the dollar. Like you said it as a matter of fact. Why do you believe that so strongly? What makes your conviction so high?
So I would say that my it's certainly not out of hubris. It's one out of logic and reason. And that on my own journey to Bitcoin, I first came to the conclusion that the dollar was irreparably broken, that it was broken beyond repair, and that it was going to end in hyperinflation, and that was a problem for the entire world, but particularly anybody using the dollar. And the dollar is the best fiat currency. So anybody using the euro yen has a similar problem. Anybody who's like lucky enough to have reasonably reliable money today is in a better position than people that don't. But that money system is broken. It's broken because of the degree of leverage. It's broken because it became co-opted by central third parties, central banks, but then the banks that control them. And so I started from the point that the dollar was broken, the dollar is going away. So then the question, if you come to that conclusion independent of Bitcoin, which I did, then you start to look and try to figure out, well, what the answer is, what is going to replace it. And from my side, and the reason why, and I don't say it nonchalantly, or I don't say it in a way that is to overlook a lot of assumptions that are built into it, but that there's actually a finite surface area to evaluate the problem, and it's Bitcoin's fixed supply. And that if you can start to understand or formulate as to how Bitcoin credibly enforces its fixed supply, and you start to develop conviction in that, which I believe is a known or knowable question. You can know it to a degree, and you can also develop high degrees of conviction in it. The more that you study it, the more time that you observe it, that if that fixed supply is credible, that money, and the most important property of it is that it store value over time, that it intermediates a series of transactions from the present to the future, and it does so identically for all individuals, or at least that being the identical problem of intermediating a series of present transactions to the future, present exchanges to the future. That the most important property of a form of money to storing value is its supply and its supply constraints, and that if Bitcoin is actually a form of money that is finite in supply, that can't be increased at all, and if all these other dollar, euro, yen, yuan, peso systems are broken, the world is going to have to adopt another form of money. And I came to the conclusion, based on kind of years of research, but also years of experience of developing a very hard conviction around the fact that Bitcoin is able to credibly enforce its fixed supply. And I think the other thing is that it's not subject to some technological silver bullet where something could happen tomorrow and the whole Bitcoin network just fall apart. That the Bitcoin's, because of its decentralized architecture, redundant architecture, that there is no software, hardware, silver bullet, technological silver bullet that could cause a 21 million fixed supply to break down. That the fixed supply is credible, and that if Bitcoin does credibly enforce its fixed supply, that the entire world will adopt it as a global reserve currency. So it's kind of two parts. It's the system is broken. It's obviously broken for people that are paying attention. It's going away whether Bitcoin is here or not. And the world's going to have to adopt a new form of money. It's going to adopt a form of money that has a fixed supply. I developed conviction around how Bitcoin enforces its fixed supply, that it is credible, and that it's also not that it's not subject to technological failure. It's more subject to social failure or social co-option, but that, as we see time and time again, that Bitcoin is sufficiently decentralized to withstand even state level co-option. And I say that based on, like, when China banned Bitcoin mining. Bitcoin mining has doubled in half since that happened. India tried to ban Bitcoin exchanges. First, people still use Bitcoin in India, but then their Supreme Court overruled it. If the same thing happened in the United States, Bitcoin would continue to work. Its working is predicated on its ability to continue to work regardless of what any government ever tried to do or intended to do.